Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to boost anti-terrorist potential of Pakistan. At a joint press conference with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi in Islamabad, Lavrov said Russia wants to supply military equipment to Pakistan. He said Russia welcomes normalization talks between Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, Qureshi said Islamabad will continue its role as a mediator in the region. World powers and Iran have agreed to form working groups to discuss Washington sanctions in a bid to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. At a news briefing, U.S. State Department spokesman called the meeting with the deal signatories in Vienna as a constructive meet. Earlier, Iran's chief negotiator Abbas Araghchi said Tehran is not interested in step-by-step revival of the deal at all. The next meeting will be held on Friday. In Myanmar, at least 3 anti-coup protesters have been shot dead and 20 others wounded by security forces in Sagaing region. According to a local advocacy group, 581 civilians have been killed in the violence following the February 1st coup. Meanwhile, Indonesia has said that the UK will support ASEAN in its effort to resolve the Myanmar crisis. Brazil has recorded more than 4,000 daily COVID-related deaths for the first time as its toll approaches 337,000. India has reported 630 deaths and this year's highest infections as over 115,000 tested positive overnight. In Pakistan, over 100 people have lost their lives while more than 4,000 tested positive over the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 132 million more. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Pakistan. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to boost anti-terrorist potential of Pakistan. He was speaking at a joint press conference with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi in Islamabad. Lavrov said Russia wants to supply military equipment to Pakistan. He said Russia welcomes normalization talks between Pakistan and India. The Russian foreign minister said current trade between Islamabad and Moscow will be increased. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Qureshi said Islamabad will continue its role as a mediator in the region. Qureshi said both sides have agreed to maintain momentum high-level contacts. During his 2-day visit, Lavrov will call on Prime Minister Imran Khan and Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa as well. Now, in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, police have banned media from covering the inhumane cordon and search operations. The Indian-occupied forces use these operations to commit extrajudicial murders of innocent, unarmed Kashmiris. In a statement, the police chief asked media not to interfere in the duty of armed forces at the operation site. Meanwhile, Indian troops have launched so-called search operations in Srinagar, Shopian and other areas of the territory. The occupying forces conducting house-to-house searches. The operation was still going on till the last reports came in. Now, world powers and Iran have agreed to form working groups to discuss Washington sanctions in a bid to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. At a news briefing, U.S. State Department spokesperson called the meeting with the deal signatories in Vienna as a constructive meet. Ned Price said it is a potentially useful step as the U.S. seeks to determine what Iranians are prepared to do to return to compliance. U.S. delegation head Rob Maley said indirect talks would be about identifying the steps that Washington and Tehran are going to have to take. In response, Iran's chief negotiator Abbas Araghchi said Washington must lift all sanctions. He said Tehran will resume its nuclear compliance only after verifying this. Araghchi added he doubts the United States has the same seriousness as Iran regarding the matter. Meanwhile, China called on the U.S. to lift all sanctions and Iran to comply with the deal. The Russian envoy to Vienna said the two working groups, one on Iran and one on the U.S., have already begun their efforts. The next meeting will be held on Friday. Now, in Brazil, more than 4,000 have died from COVID-19 overnight, registering yet another record number. India has reported 630 deaths and this year's highest infections as over 115,000 tested positive overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 132 million. More on the pandemic in this report. The coronavirus crisis, lingering on for about 15 months now, is aggravating socio-economic difficulties across the world. Canada's Prime Minister says the country is facing a very serious third wave as its most populous province struggles to respond to rising cases. In the United States, White House spokesperson said Washington will not back a system that requires Americans to carry vaccine credentials. This comes as President Joe Biden moved up the vaccine eligibility target for all adults to April 19th, 2 weeks earlier than May 1st. In South America, medical students came to the streets against the lack of vaccines in Venezuela, while Peruvian doctors protested over work conditions. As Brazil's death toll approaches 337,000, experts term country's crisis as biological Fukushima.
Brazil is the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic globally, and the World Health Organization recognizes this. Forecasts by some epidemiological institutes show that probably before July 1st, Brazil will surpass the 500,000 mark of COVID-19 deaths, rapidly approaching the total number of deaths of the United States, the country that had the highest absolute number of deaths.
Europe's drug regulator says it has not yet reached a conclusion over AstraZeneca, after a senior official from the agency said there was a link between the Oxford vaccine and blood clotting. Germany's drug maker CureVac says global supply chains for making COVID-19 vaccines have been disrupted by U.S. restrictions. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has again condemned the unavailability of vaccines to a number of countries.
Scaling up production and equitable distribution remains the major barrier to ending the acute stage of this pandemic. It is a travesty that in some countries health workers and those at risk groups remain completely unvaccinated.
Australia says it will ask the European Union to release more than 3 million AstraZeneca's doses. Testing Brussels claim it is not blocking shipments. Now, the death toll from COVID-19 in Pakistan has topped 15,000 and it reported more than 100 daily deaths again. The Health Ministry recorded 102 fatalities and more than 4,000 new infections overnight. The caseload has surpassed 700,000, out of which more than 620,000 people have recovered. The ministry said the country's positivity ratio stands at 9.6%. At present, there are over 64,000 active cases in the country. More than 3,800 are critical. Now moving to Myanmar, where at least 3 anti-coup protesters have been shot dead by security forces in Sagaing region. More than 20 others were wounded. The violence erupted as troops entered the protest site in the town of Kale. Meanwhile, Indonesia says the UK will support ASEAN in its effort to resolve the Myanmar crisis. Elsewhere, China said another of its factories in Yangon have been burned. Official estimates put the property damage at above $1 million. According to a local advocacy group, 581 civilians have been killed following the February 1st coup. Also, at least 100 people have been killed in border clashes between Ethiopia's Afar and Somali region since Friday. Both sides deny having initiated the attacks and blame the other for the violence. Afar Police Commissioner has accused Somali regional forces of the violence. A spokesperson for the Somali region said 25 people were killed on Friday alone. He said an unknown number of civilians died in subsequent attacks. In 2014, the Ethiopian federal government redrew the boundary between the two states. 3 small towns were transferred to Afar from Somalia, which has since tried to win them back. Prime Minister Imran Khan will lead Pakistan's delegation to the 10th virtual D8 summit hosted by Bangladesh on the 8th of April. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi will attend the 19th Council of Ministers meeting preceding the summit. Heads of 8 member states will attend the virtual summit. The theme of the summit is Partnership for a Transformative World, harnessing power of youth and technology. The summit is expected to adopt a declaration and decennial roadmap 2020 to 2030. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will hand over the chairmanship of the forum to Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his main concern is to lift the people of his country out of poverty. Khan held a meeting in Islamabad with members of the United Nations Development Programme. Speaking at the launch of UNDP's Pakistan Human Development Report, Khan said Islamabad will be approaching the International Monetary Fund for assistance given the challenges posed by COVID-19. He said despite Pakistan's economy moving in the right direction, authorities see disruptions ahead. The Prime Minister said the service sector has been badly affected and will require incentive packages. Khan said the UNDP report will help Islamabad directly subsidize the population which is in need of financial assistance. Now, Malaysia's former Prime Minister is served with a bankruptcy notice for failing to pay more than $400 million in unpaid taxes. In a Facebook post, former Premier Razak Najib said authorities issued the notice on Monday shortly after his appeal hearing. He described the move as an attempt to destroy his political career as he will lose his seat in Parliament if declared bankrupt. He said the timing of notice was linked to last month's decision by his political party to stop cooperating with ruling party in upcoming elections. Najib is facing dozens of corruption and money laundering charges over the suspected theft of billions of dollars from 1MDB. But he has denied wrongdoing and launched a court appeal to set aside his conviction. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. In the U.S., witnesses in the Derek Chauvin's murder trial say the neck restraint during George Floyd's arrest was unauthorized. Police trainer Lieutenant Johnny Mercill said officers are trained to use the least amount of force necessary. Mercill said a neck restraint is authorized only when the suspect is actively and aggressively resisting. Talking to the jurors, he said the police officers are cautioned to be mindful of the neck area. This comes a day after the city's police chief testified that Chauvin violated department rules and ethics. The 19-year-old police veteran Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to charges of murder and manslaughter. Now, the Sudanese cabinet has voted to repeal a 1958 law that forbade diplomatic and business relations with Israel. In October last year, Sudan signed up a US-sponsored deal to normalize ties with Israel. The cabinet says Sudan stands firm on its position for a separate Palestinian state despite repealing the law. In a statement, it said the move needs approval from the Sovereign Council before it can take effect. Israel has welcomed the move. Now, Israel's new parliament has been sworn in amid an unprecedented political stalemate after an inconclusive election. The oath-taking occurred hours after President Reuven Rivlin invited Premier Benjamin Netanyahu to form a new government. The country's longest-serving leader, Netanyahu, now faces a tough challenge of enlisting allies for a governing coalition. Last month's elections ended with neither a Netanyahu-led bloc nor a prospective alliance capturing a parliamentary majority. Moving on now, the European Commission says it will make a proposal to Turkey to ensure the flow of funding for refugees the country hosts. Turkey hosts nearly 4 million refugees and has repeatedly accused the EU of not honouring its promises as per the 2016 migrant deal. Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen held a meeting with President Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. Von der Leyen said Ankara must respect human rights and the rule of law for such funding. In a news conference, von der Leyen said issues have absolute priority and are non-negotiable. She said Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention that is aimed at protecting women had not sent the right signal. Now, Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi says the Libyan government must ensure the country's ceasefire is maintained and strictly observed. He met with his Libyan counterpart Abdulhamid Dbeibeh in Tripoli. The two leaders discussed immigration and economic cooperation. Draghi said the two countries have strong historic ties and called for enhancing bilateral relations. Meanwhile, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis has also held a meeting with Dbeibeh in Tripoli. The premiers of Italy and Greece have joined a growing number of foreign leaders visiting Libya as it seeks to end a decade of chaos. Now moving to the USA Navy corpsman shot 2 other service members, wounding one of them critically at a Maryland business park. Police said he was shot and killed after going to a nearby Army base. Officials said the 2 wounded and the attacker were assigned to the same fort. Detrick Base police said that the suspect used a rifle in the incident, but it was unclear whether it was issued by the military. Authorities said an investigation into the incident is underway. In business stories, the International Monetary Fund says China's economy is projected to expand by 8.4% in 2021. The latest World Economic Outlook forecast marked the country's strongest growth rate since 2011. The figure is 0.3 percentage points above IMF earlier prediction. The IMF said effective containment measures facilitated China's return to pre-COVID GDP in the year 2020. It said many other developing economies are not expected to do so until 2023. The fund noted its forecast for China is much higher than other major economies, including the US. The Monetary Fund also projected that the global economy will grow by 6% in 2021. Shares in the Asia-Pacific are trading mixed as investors digest growth predictions by the IMF and monitor pandemic situation. The ASX 200 in Australia has gained the most, rising over 0.5%. Sales Kospi in Japan's Nikkei 225 have also edged up marginally. However, shares in mainland China have edged down, while the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong has shed over 0.5%. And with that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.